Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. And today's guest is Aaron Hurst, a social entrepreneur extraordinaire and the author of The Purpose Economy. And I'm proud to call Aaron a friend. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, old friend.
We're excited. You've recently published, in partnership with NYU, an interesting new report about purpose-oriented people. And, the headline for me was, purpose-oriented people are more productive. Tell us about this report. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, this is something that came out of my work with the Taproot Foundation, just trying to understand where people get purpose in their work. And what the research started to show was there's actually not one monolithic workforce as we think about it. And you hear all these studies about engagement is terrible, the workforce is so, unfulfilled. And what we realized was there's two different workforces. There's a workforce that works for purpose, which means they work for fulfillment and to help others. And there's people who just work for money or to climb a ladder. And what we found was that the purpose-oriented workforce is thriving. They have higher fulfillment, they're better performers. Every single thing we measured on, they're doing great. Those that don't work for purpose are really struggling. They're underperforming, they're not getting the fulfillment. So it's not just about productivity. As human beings, their well-being is lower. So it's actually a tragedy, not just economically, but socially. And the sad thing, as you saw in the report, was 72% of the US workforce, and we studied across the whole workforce, isn't purpose-oriented. So we talk a lot about skills gaps, we talk about engagement gaps. What we really have is a purpose gap. We need more people to be purpose-oriented.
So what does your data suggest? Is there any hope for moving the non-purpose-oriented into the purpose camp? Can we bring them over?
Yeah, I think that's a Herculean task. I don't think it's impossible, but we saw in the data that from 18 until about the age of 55, very few people change. At 55, there seems to be a big jump, which we think is tied to that traditional midlife crisis. It's not wisdom. If it were wisdom, you'd see just sort of a upward tick towards purpose. We're seeing it more as you hit a wall and change, which also means it's harder to change people. We think the bigger lesson here is that as parents, and as educators, we need to think more about how we're preparing people to think about work. Are we telling people the story as kids that work is a necessary evil? Are we telling them it's a game to be won? Is it about ego and money? Or are we telling stories about how we're building great relationships, making an impact on the world, and growing through our work, regardless of what that work is? So the lesson to me is largely about how do we affect kids before they enter the workforce?
I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. I don't entirely regret my career, but I spent 25 years in rather strict pursuit of money and never found that especially fulfilling. 5 years ago, I made purpose the purpose, and I've been much happier despite the fact that I made much less money. Yeah. What are you seeing in the data that makes the purpose-oriented people so much happier and more productive? What's going on there?
I think it's one of those things where it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So there's lots of reasons to not like work, and there's a lot of reasons to like work. And if you are programmed from the get-go to see work as a game or a necessary evil, you can find evidence every day of reasons why work is terrible. And then it becomes this cycle that you look for, and it becomes reality. I think if you're trained early on to see work as a place where you can have great relationships, where you can make an impact and growth, there's awesome examples of that, and you take advantage of that. So you have two employees in the exact same job. One of them is thriving and the other one's not. It's largely because they appreciate what's in front of them, and they celebrate it, and they look for opportunity instead of looking for problems. So it's that fundamental mindset of entitlement and negativity versus gratitude and positivity.
How does a purpose-oriented person approach a job search different from a non-purpose-oriented person? And how does this influence the way that recruiters and employers should be behaving with respect to these populations?
Yeah, we consistently find that the purpose-oriented folks are looking for, they want pay that's fair. They want to be in a position that they feel is at their level, but that's not where the emphasis is. That just got to be fair. It doesn't have to be exceptional. What they're looking for is the quality of relationships So how well are they going to work with that manager, with that team? What's the culture like? Are they really going to make friends? They don't see work and life as separate things. They want to see, is this a group of people I can be friends with? Secondly, they want to know not what is the impact of the organization. Like that matters a little bit. It's more like every day, am I going to be able to do things that matter, or am I going to be doing a lot of work that doesn't at the end of the day make a difference to anyone? And then they want to see that people are growing and that they're going to be stretched and challenged. So this sense of growth that can come with the job. And they realize it's not just about you're going to have a certain number of classes you can take or you're going to be given professional development opportunities. It's more about stretch projects and trusting them to fail and learn from that.
So what do you think, what fundamentally drives a purpose-oriented person versus the non-purpose-oriented person? What's the psychology sort of underpinning all of this, or do we understand that?
A lot of it goes to that relationships impacting growth and just sort of seeing those pieces. But they tend to, again, come from this point of gratitude and a sense of good fortune at their life and the things they have out there for them. And they also just have a sense that work isn't about management and staff and this adversarial relationship, that work itself is something that is core to their life and how they live and how they experience the world. So it's a much more integrated and blended view of everything in their lives versus a very siloed point of view. We've also looked at, it's not in the report, but we did a smaller study on Erickson's stages of development to see if purpose-oriented people are developing differently than their counterparts. And the data sample is smaller, but we are seeing that purpose-oriented people have completed the stages of development to really have matured, whereas non-purpose-oriented people aren't. And I'll give you one great example. A study out of Michigan actually found people who only work for money, they couldn't find one of them who had a good relationship with their mother, which is interesting, right? So if people are only about money, I say instead of judging them, hug them and say, look, I'm sorry you didn't have a good relationship with your mother. These people out there that are at work and are just purely capitalist-oriented, all about winning the game, making the money, they're missing something psychologically that gives them confidence to be human. They feel like they have to play this role of the professional. They have to be a gladiator. And that's not good for the organization. It's not good for them.
That is such an interesting insight. I really appreciate you sharing that. Did you find in your data, in your research, in your maybe even just at an anecdotal level, do you see a difference in the purpose orientation of the organization? That is, I'm trying to understand if people that are more purpose oriented are especially drawn to an organization like UNICEF compared to Apple. Most people would describe as a purpose oriented business, but compared with, say, UNICEF or the World Health Organization, not as purpose driven. Does that make sense? Or do you see any distinctions there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different levels. So we didn't do, the survey we did was of individuals. It wasn't association with their organizations. But we did look at industry. So you do see that education, healthcare, nonprofits tend to attract more purpose-oriented people, but it's still less than half. I mean, Devin, think about the fact that the average nonprofit organization, the majority of their employees are not purpose-oriented.
Wow.
The majority of people working in education are not purpose-oriented. The average healthcare employee is not purpose-oriented. They're the highest, but they're still not majority. So you see there's an attraction of technology where a lot of sexy companies are, only about 1 in 5 of those employees is purpose-oriented. So you see there's a huge variation in industry, right?
Yeah.
At an organizational level, I think you're right that there's organizations that are able to be purpose-oriented, even if they're not in a purpose-oriented industry. And what happens is purpose-oriented people talk well of their organization, so they attract more of their type. So you'll see an organization like LinkedIn that we've studied in depth. They have a lot of alignment on what they do. It's a highly fulfilling place to work. So their employees tend to speak really well. It ends up showing up really well on Glassdoor. When they go out to drinks, they talk well of their company. Whereas non-purpose-oriented people generally talk smack to their coworkers and to external folks. So it becomes self-fulfilling again, where the organizations that are purpose-oriented attract more of them, and those that don't spiral down because they're not speaking well of the organization.
So how does an employer screen for purpose orientation? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's become our core business at Imperative, is helping organizations measure purpose at their company or nonprofit. And then we have tools now to help actually through a psychological assessment screen employees. And we're seeing organizations from small to large starting to screen for this, because once you see the data, it becomes malpractice to hire someone who isn't purpose-oriented, just seeing how big a delta there is there. So that's key. If people want to do that or try it, there's 3 general areas you can probe on a qualitative basis. One is asking, Devin, if you were to win the lottery tomorrow, what would you do? And listening for whether or not someone would still try to add value to the world or whether they would hit a golf course and do leisure, which is sort of the old model, which is work is a necessary evil to get to leisure. Second area to probe is relationships. Does someone stay in touch with their old coworkers? What kinds of relationships did they foster? Or were they sort of in a very isolated sort of professional role and didn't connect with past coworkers? And the third is really around gratitude. And this is something Google does, Amazon does. They really look to see, does someone feel entitled and that they earned everything they did? Or do they realize that what they did was with the help of many and with a lot of good fortune? Those are pretty good indicators.
Yeah, interesting. I really appreciate you sharing those insights. This is just powerful, powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Aaron, you are, of course, you're well recognized as a leader in social entrepreneurship circles and impact investing. I mean, you're the man, and so a lot of people look up to you as a role model. Who do you look up to in turn as a role model?
I appreciate you saying that. For me, it's not someone famous. It's my sister. My sister was near death in her teenage years, battling addiction, multiple times like found on the street. My mother died early, and that really hit her hard. She barely graduated high school, but she really turned her life around and has been sober for over 2 decades. She was able to put herself through college as an adult, and now she's the deputy to the mayor of Portland. So she's risen from the streets to actually being in a position to help other people in the city of Portland. And to me, it's about not how high you get, it's about the journey and the courage to get there. I think it's easy to try to give advice and help others. It's much harder to do it for yourself and a lot of the time. And I just see the courage that she's had. That to me gives me goosebumps because that's hard. That's facing your demons.
That is an inspiring story. I really appreciate you sharing that insight. I think you were the first to say that he admired his sister. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think that's especially noble. But we get a lot of people who admire their mothers, never the sister. So thank you. Now, I want to ask you. You're clearly a purpose-oriented guy.
Yeah.
Why, at a personal level, why do you think you are purpose-oriented? Where does that come from for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's funny. The more of this work you do, the more you sort of get wrapped up in the philosophy and you start having trouble detaching reality versus theory. I think there's a couple of things that made a big difference for me. And one was just growing up in a family in which work was always something that you did out of enjoyment. And my grandfather was a major, inspiration for me. He helped develop the Peace Corps. He ran the Aspen Institute for a long time. And the story was always not what did you achieve? It was about what did you learn? What interesting people did you meet? How did you help other people? Those were the stories that we talked about around the table. And I think that made a big difference. It's interesting, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, but I've informally been looking at other social entrepreneurs. And the one thing we tend to almost all have in common was we had a death happen early in our lives in our core family. And I think what's interesting, and you talked in a previous conversation we had about Haiti, and you talk about developing nations. I think often there's more purpose in cultures where people actually deal with the reality of mortality and that we aren't going to be here forever. And I think what a lot of social entrepreneurs have in common is that they see that early in their lives, and it makes them appreciate every day. And it makes them realize you can't take money with you. You can't take status with you. What you can try to do is just really enjoy your experience every day and to help those around you do the same. So I think having my mother die at an early age was really had a huge impact on me. And it's, I think, also why we see at 55 a huge spike in the number of purpose-oriented people, because that's the age where a lot of people start to lose friends and start to deal with the fact that they're not going to be around forever. And when you realize that, you start to realize chasing money is kind of a fool's errand.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I appreciate you sharing such personal thoughts, but it's really insightful to think about the impact of appreciating mortality on
our society,
social mindset, that purpose orientation. So
it's one of the biggest problems in our society, I think, is that we hide death. We like to watch it. We like to play video games about it. But when it comes to actual death, People are sent away. People used to die in their homes. Now they're sent to hospices. We do everything we can to avoid the reality of death. And I think it really diminishes our emotional maturity by making that so separate. I really think one of the things I'd love to see us conquer more is to talk about death, to experience it, volunteer in a hospice. I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do.
I think it's a great insight. One last question for
Yeah.
you, Aaron, before you go. We ask all of our guests for an impact hack, some tip that would help us do more good in the world. And certainly you are doing a lot of good, so you're a real authority on this. What's your tip for us?
To me, it's just always remembering your true north. We're all superheroes that have incredible abilities to make an impact. But knowing whether or not you're Batman, Spider-Man, or Wonder Woman is important because you have different skills and you have different ability to make an impact. And I think really being honest with yourself about what is your potential. And when you see other opportunities, trying to really steer back to the core. And that's why one of the first things I did in Imperative was develop our purpose assessment. It's a free 10-minute assessment that enables someone to determine what is it, Devin, that actually drives purpose for you. And just every day remembering that that's who you are so you can bring that back to your work and to help focus every day. Am I doing that today or am I getting distracted?
Well, fantastic. I think that true north is a key, and I will employ that as a guide in my work, because I think it would not only help me have more impact, it would help me be more successful too. I really think that staying on focus is a good guide for a lot of purposes. So thank you.
Especially now with all the different distractions, it's so easy to go off course, and to remember sort of who you are and what impact you can have and what's going to bring you that sense of fulfillment is so critical.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, before you go, tell people how they can get in touch with you, learn more about your book, learn more about Imperative. Give us the lowdown.
No, absolutely. I mean, imperative.com is a great place to start. I'm on Twitter, Aaron_Hurst, and actively tweet there. I'm also an influencer on LinkedIn. So I'd love to have you follow me there. I write about once a week on different topics around purpose. And if you have a specific question about your organization or how we can help transform it, love to hear from you at Aaron@imperative.com.
Fantastic. Aaron, thank you very much for being here. And we wish you every success in the great work that you're doing.
Likewise, sir.
All righty. Let's do some good.